Hello, my name's Sarah Jones and I was ordained in the Church of England in 2004. I'm now in the church in Wales and I'm serving the people in central Cardiff. So although my name's Sarah, it wasn't always Sarah. And when I say that, I usually have to stop and take a breath because the thought of it literally takes my breath away. I was brought up as a boy because my parents thought I was a boy. I thought I was a boy. We all thought I was a boy. And yet somehow I just wasn't. I tried to be a boy for almost half my life, and yet I just wasn't. I'm hoping that this session, this film, will help you to understand the issues behind transgender people and help you to explore how you can welcome them into your church. Now I'm here in Butte Park because I love the natural environment. I'd rather be out in nature than stuck in a building most of the time. There's something amazing about what God has created. The trees, the grass, the blue sky, the sun, the fresh air, the River Taff, the wildlife, little tributaries, all these things in their natural glory. And right now, there might be a little bit of you just saying quietly to yourself, it's a bit odd Sarah going on about how much she loves natural things, because transgender people aren't exactly natural, are they? It's okay if you think that. You need to be honest with yourself, and we need to be honest together. But I have to say this, transgender people might be a little bit more natural than you think. I was quite young when I realised that there was something different about my gender identity. When I went to primary school, somehow I just was more one of the girls than one of the boys. And later in life, I found Jan Morris's beautiful book, Conundrum. It's a short book, but it's elegantly and carefully written. And at the start of the book, Jan describes sitting under the piano when she was 3 or 4 while her mother played it. And at that moment, Jan knew she should have been a girl and not a boy. It's relatively typical for people to feel early on in life that there has been some mistake, that they're not the gender they were assigned to at birth. But it's not always the case. Some people take until their 30s, 40s or 50s or beyond that before they actually manage to articulate this thought. And that's pretty jolly reasonable when you think about it, because everything in your life just points to the fact that you are what was said on your original birth certificate. The question is not even really a question. There is no doubt. So for some of us, it takes quite a while until we get to the point of naming our gender identity as being wrong. At primary school, I played in the girls' playground until I got to an age where that was socially unacceptable. And then I played right in the gap between the boys' playground and the girls' playground. If only we'd understood metaphor at that tender age, it might have saved us all a lot of trouble. As I got to secondary school, things got a little sharper, and of course the issue of sexuality came into the mix. As I grew into my adult life, I took this sense of unease with me. I put my femininity in a box, and I thought I could handle it. But in my mid-20s, it suddenly became the biggest single issue in my life. When I first realised that I needed to do something about my gender, I went to see my doctor. And he was very good, because he said he didn't know where he needed to refer me to, but if I found the place, he'd be happy to send me there. I'd always taken my religion seriously, and so I went to see my parish priest. He also was very good, because he said he wasn't quite sure what to say, but that he'd find me someone to talk to. And I think this was very wise of them both. And if someone ever comes to you with an issue or a problem in something that you're not an expert, it strikes me it's far better for you to say, let's work it out together, than to pretend that you know things you don't. To take my religion seriously, I needed to look at what the Bible said. The book of Deuteronomy, chapter 22, verse 5, seems to be clear. No woman should wear the clothes of a man, and no man should wear a woman's clothes. Chapter 23, verse 1 is clearer still. No man whose testicles have been crushed or whose penis has been cut off will enter the assembly of God. And yet, in chapter 22, verse 11, we find that we're not supposed to wear clothes of mixed fibres. And chapter 22, verses 20 onwards tell us that if you marry a slave woman and you find on your wedding night that she is not a virgin, you should take her out and stone her. Isaiah chapter 56 gives more hope, because the Lord promises to those eunuchs who have kept God's commandments, they shall be more than sons and daughters to God. So what did Jesus say about transgender people and transgender issues? Here's everything that Jesus said on the topic. And no, your internet has not frozen. Jesus said nothing. So perhaps the Bible isn't quite so clear as we thought. And yet, there are gender variant people in the Bible. For instance, if we take Luke chapter 22, Jesus sends his disciples out to prepare the Passover meal. They ask him how they'll know that they're in the right spot, and he tells them to look out for a man carrying a jar of water. That may not seem so unusual to you, but in those days, carrying pitchers of water was women's work. Or in John chapter 4, we find Jesus in Samaria talking at a well with a woman. And in those days, no male religious leader would have engaged in theological discussion with a lone woman. And where were Jesus' disciples? They were off shopping for lunch. Now you might think that sex is quite simple. If you've got XX chromosomes, you're female, and if you have XY, you're male, and there's nothing in between. It's a bit like crossing this road. You're either on one side of it or the other, but it's not quite as simple as that. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes. One of these determines your sex. If you have two X's, you're female, and if you have an X and a Y, you're male. Except it's not all down to chromosomes. Human sexual characteristics are a mixture of genes, chromosomes, and hormones in a sort of chemical cascade. A key player in this chemical cascade is the SRY gene. It normally lives on the Y chromosome and it's responsible for male sex characteristics. Except on occasions it can be found on the X chromosome. So every so often an XX woman will be born with an SRY gene. And in this case, they'll have internal female sexual characteristics, but male genitalia. Some males are born with a particular gene mutation which gives them a 5-alpha reductase deficiency. And in these cases, the males will be born with internal male sex organs, but external female genitalia. And at puberty, they will usually exhibit male secondary sex characteristics. So their voice may break, they may grow facial hair and muscle mass. Some women are born with just one X chromosome, or X and a part of a second X. And it's estimated that 1 in 200 girls are born this way. And that can lead to slight alterations in genitalia. Primary and secondary sexual characteristics then are clearly quite a delicate matter. We know that there are slight differences in the brains of males and females. And we also know that these differences are amplified by hormones and our perception of the world. Is it any wonder then that there's a plethora of intersex conditions, as well as a whole lot that we don't understand about our gender identity? I think from the beginning that I really felt I probably did need to change my gender. But it was such a big change that I didn't want to rush into it. And I wanted to find the real me. So it took me 9 years from starting the process to finishing it. And along the way, I explored lots of different identities. And at the end of it, when I still felt that I had to make a gender change, I knew it was right for me and that I'd found my place in the world. If a trans person approaches you to explore worshipping within your community, please bear in mind that it's taken enormous courage for that person to approach you in the first place. You may have a welcoming and inclusive congregation, but the general feeling out there amongst the queer community, and the trans community in particular, is that churches will not be welcoming them. So anyone who's contacted you has really put their courage front and centre. Secondly, they're not doing it because their family think they should or because it's the done thing. They're going countercultural here. If they approach you, it's because they're responding to something deep within them that wants to connect with God. It's a true and authentic call. And we could all do with a few disciples like that in our community. Trans people really need your support. In recent years, there's been an upsurge in anti-trans feeling, and Stonewall are saying that the position for trans people at the moment is very much like it was for lesbian and gay people 20 or 30 years ago. In a report they produced about bullying in schools, they said that 9% of trans people in school had received death threats. And over 40% had missed school because of bullying or discrimination. Workplaces are often not much better. This is a real opportunity to reach out and show someone that they are loved by God and by their fellow humans. So what advice would I give you in terms of dealing with the issue of a transgender person in your church? Firstly, you're not dealing with the issue of the transgender person. It's actually probably far more about your own perceptions and your own thoughts, and possibly that of your worshipping community. Let's not make it a problem with this particular person. Secondly, do remember that this is exactly what we're called to do. We're called to take God's blessing and the gospel out to all people of all nations and include them visibly in the community of God. Also, please don't feel that you need to be an expert and know things that you don't actually know. It's fine not to know things. And there are many situations in pastoral life where the expert is the person talking to you and not you. These days, it's quite easy and simple to do research between pastoral conversations. One Body, One Faith and Inclusive Church are good church resources. Organisations such as Mermaids can provide excellent support. And quite frankly, call me maybe, or more accurately, email me. On top of that, it's worth remembering what the Bible says about welcoming the stranger, about showing hospitality, about not judging, and about the inclusive nature of God. My experience is that most congregations are more flexible and welcoming than you might think. But it might happen that one or two members of your community might give you a hard time over welcoming trans people. You'll have encountered similar things occasionally in ministry, I'm sure. And in your heart, you'll know that sometimes leadership involves stepping out there ahead of some people, showing the way. And we can't always work with not offending anyone. Our church communities are meant to step out, to be adventurous and to take risks for the gospel. Ships in harbour are safe, but that's not what ships are for. You will need to pray and you will need courage and you will need support. But in your heart, you know it's the right thing to do. One final piece of advice. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You might use the wrong pronoun or use the wrong word. What's a trans man? What's a trans woman? It doesn't matter if you make a mistake once. You're on a learning curve, and quite frankly, everybody in the situation is. Don't let fear of failure stop you from doing the right thing. I hope that you've enjoyed this session and that you've found it interesting and useful. Recently, there's been quite a bit more talk in society and in churches about transgender issues. Some people will tell you that the biology is clear-cut and simple, but I hope I've shown that that isn't the case. Some Christians will tell you that the Bible is clear, but I haven't found that to be so. And even the great creation story, where we read how God creates humankind, male and female, well, how exactly are we supposed to read that? Does it necessarily imply a strict binary with nothing in between? Because that's not what our current science is telling us. Of late, there has been some anti-trans feeling. People who have been classified as male at birth, who've made a gender change, have been accused of being men or males invading women's spaces. There's been the unsavoury question about whether our daughters or women generally are safe in changing rooms if transgender women are around. It's true that more people who have been classified female at birth are now questioning their gender. And it's also true that more younger people are coming forward with the same questions about their identity. But do please remember that most transgender people will tell you that they knew early on that how they were classified on their birth certificate may not be the full story. Lots of people will have lots of different views about transgender people. Many people will not know anything about intersex people or non-binary people. But please do remember that we are all disciples, created and loved by God. And I wish you well with welcoming us into your worshipping communities.